Hello, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. It is a little bit of a blustery day here in Portland, Oregon. I'm sitting in my permaculture food forest garden. We're actually sitting in the sun trap. So behind me you can see a little bit of the orchard that rings the property. And a sun trap is a place to grow annual veggies where I have made sure that my garden design does not have fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes blocking the incoming sun into the center of my garden, because that's where I grow my annual veggies, and annual veggies like sunshine. I've gotten a lot of requests about making this video, and today is the day. The timing is right. In permaculture, we want to strike when the iron is hot. We want to do things in tune with the seasons when it's appropriate, and now is the time of year for this chore. So here you can see a tomato behind me. I have garlic and squash and tree collards and all kinds of things in this bed. And along the fence behind it, I have comfrey planted all along the fence. I have comfrey all over my garden, and it serves multiple purposes. You can check some of my older videos, which I probably should remake, but older videos about why comfrey is a darling in permaculture, why it is universally used in permaculture. So this is some Phytum officinale, and this is actually a hybrid, which is a sterile variety called Russian Bocking 14. It does not set seed. If you want to grow comfrey, please know that when you plant it, you will have it there forever. Every little piece of root the size of your pinky nail or bigger can start a whole new plant. So as long as you have something that can vigorously regrow from root cuttings, you might as well help yourself and not get a variety that also will vigorously set seed. Russian Bocking 14, sterile. I get mine from Co's Comfrey, certified organic, great little company. You can check out my older videos for why I grow comfrey, but today I want to utilize it for one specific purpose. And this is the time of year that I need to do that. So comfrey is an herbaceous perennial, and it comes up pretty early in the spring. Now, there's a comfrey back here that's much shorter, and that's because my ducks have mowed it to the ground. They love comfrey. But this is what it looks like if it's not been pruned or cut at all since it came up early in the spring. When comfrey first comes up, it forms these little hook-like buds of flowers, and they unfurl and flower from the back down to the tip. And you'll notice the succession of blossoms. And when all of the blossoms have faded and fallen off, except for the ones on the very tip of that curl, you know it is time to cut your comfrey back. And I cut it back all the way to the ground. That's usually the first week of June in my climate. And the reason that I do that is because I'm going to use those cuttings in my garden, but also because when it is done flowering, it's down to the last set of blossoms. If you cut it to the ground, it will regrow. All of this will regrow and it will flower again in the end of July and August. So I want to get as much bee food and as much duck food and as much benefit out of this plant as I can. So cutting a lot of your herbaceous perennials back in June is good for them. It's especially good for comfrey. So what am I going to do with all of these cuttings? This is a lot of green leafy material. I could just put it in my compost. That'd be great. I use it as mulch around my tomato plants. I use it as food for my ducks, but I also make fermented comfrey tea with it. So why make a fermented tea, and how do we make it? Comfrey is very, very high in nitrogen. And when you make a fermented tea, you are creating a nitrogen-rich organic fertilizer with a bunch of other trace minerals in it as well. So it makes a great plant feed. Now here in my climate, toward the last week of June, it's time to fertilize my tomatoes. I don't fertilize a lot of things in my garden. I don't use inorganic salt fertilizers, which are terrible for the soil. And yes, I need to make a video on that subject. But I do go ahead and feed them a little bit because I don't have perfect soil, because I'm still working on building soil fertility even after 13 years. And I started with a very poor quality soil. I want to give my plants a little bit of a boost as my system is still coming into balance. I can do that by giving them a feed of nitrogen-rich trace mineral rich Comfrey Fertilizer starting in late June. So I need to make it now because I did say fermented fertilizer. So, oh boy, get ready, y'all. It's gonna stink to high heaven. But it needs about 3 weeks to brew. And then it will be ready to use on my plants. So Mother Nature in my climate sure knows what she's doing. The comfrey is done flowering right at the time I need to cut it back and start fermenting the tea in order to have fertilizer ready at the time I need to apply it to my tomatoes. So the first thing I want to do is, as you can see here, we are down to no blossoms left, or one little blossom. So this is how I know it's time to cut it back. You can see the one that the ducks munched on and has just started regrowing. This is what they look like when they're just beginning to open. They unfurl, starting at the top here all the way down. And when the very last one of these is open, it looks like this. So this is a comfrey that is at the end of its bloom cycle. I'm gonna take it here and I'm gonna cut it all the way to the ground with hand pruners. You can see on the far side where the ducks have nibbled it through the fence. Now, you might want to wear gloves for this. Comfrey does have little hairs that can be irritating to the skin for some people. The other thing I use this fermented comfrey tea for is that I use it as a foliar spray on all of my trees in my orchard to help feed them and give them a little bit of an extra boost. So let me go over how I make fermented comfrey tea. All right, we are now sitting in my side yard garden. You can see my hardy geranium and marionberry behind me. And that's because I needed to be near the spigot and fill a 5-gallon bucket 2/3 to 3/4 of the way full of water. And to this bucket, I am going to add the comfrey that I just picked. Now this may seem like a lot, but it will break down. I have found that the comfrey from one plant is just about right for a 5-gallon bucket batch of fermented comfrey tea. Now be careful when you are folding and buckling the comfrey down into the bucket. If there are any blossoms, there may be bees in your plant, particularly bumblebees, which I have noticed will hang on to the blossoms long after I pick the plant. So carefully fold it in here in the water. Now, I'm going to add a brick or two on top of this and let it sit for 2 to 3 weeks. That may seem like a long time. And during those 2 to 3 weeks, this will turn into a gross brown sludge as the comfrey ferments in the bucket. I liken it to the bog of eternal stench. It smells horrific. It smells worse than fish emulsion, worse than fermented kelp fertilizer. It is reeking and awful. And you may want to put it somewhere away from your property line so that your neighbors don't have to smell it, but it will stink to high heaven. So with this bog of eternal stench brew, in 2 to 3 weeks, I'm going to take it and put 1 part of comfrey tea to 6 parts of water, and I'm going to use that on my tomatoes starting the end of June for a weekly feeding throughout the season. I will also use it as a foliar spray on my fruit trees and any other plants I feel could use a boost throughout the season. Now this will store after you make it. I found I go through 5 gallons pretty quickly here because I have a lot of plants on my property. But if you make a batch of it, it will store for over a year. You can put it in old milk jugs or something sealed. Just be aware that if you leave the plant matter in it, it will continue to ferment and potentially off gas, and you may need to burp it just like a bottle of kombucha or something. But if you strain all of the fermented leaf matter off, just the liquid can be kept in bottles. So I hope that gives you a good look at my process for making fermented comfrey tea, a nitrogen-rich amendment to add to your plants to give them a boost in your garden. If you have a permaculture garden and you don't want to fertilize, but you are working on helping build soil fertility and you don't have that incredibly healthy soil microbiome, it's not going to hurt to help your plants in this way. Give them a little boost while you bring your system into balance with the addition of some fermented comfrey tea to the foliage or straight around the ground at the roots of the plant. You'll be doing your plants a service and increasing your yields in your garden. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. You can also check out my Patreon in the description. I'll be back soon with more about permaculture gardening and sustainable living. Thanks.